Hey there, everyone. Thank you for downloading and listening to episode 92 of the Dependent Independent podcast. I'm your host, Nick G, and this is a 200 episode podcast about making connections, looking back while moving forward. In these episodes, which I'm usually joined by a co-host, but this is a solo show for me, and these shows post each and every Thursday at 9 a.m. We tackle a topic, we share stories and experiences that hopefully both of us can relate to, and we learn something, and then with those learnings, we continue to move forward. Now, this is a solo episode. I'm actually recording this twofold. I'm recording this audio podcast, which will post this Thursday at 9 a.m. So if you're listening to this, thank you for downloading and listening to the show. If you're a brand new listener to the show, make sure you hit the subscribe button on whatever iOS or Android podcast app you're playing. We're everywhere on the interwebs, and we have hyperlinks to find your preferred podcast player in the show notes. But this is also being recorded on video because I'm trying something new. Not new, but different. I've been in my home-based studio, the Dependent Independent Studios, for the last several months, and I have not recorded in my old office, which is actually on the second floor of my house, in between my bedroom and the kids' bedroom, and the wife and my kids are still up. And I'm sorry, but you're probably going to hear some ambient noise, which you don't usually do from the studio, but I don't care because this is real life, and that's what we do on the Dependent Independent podcast. But they are watching The Bachelor. I think one of the guys got... it's such a weird show. I have no idea why these people put themselves through it, but they supposedly fall in love with somebody and then just dump one of them. So one of the guys got dumped, and he was crying, and the kids were laughing. And I'd tell my wife and or my daughter that that's not real life, so please don't pay attention to that, because these people have peaked on Bachelorette and Bachelor. They've already done everything that you could possibly do in a relationship. Sit in a hot tub in the middle of on a glacier, like all that stuff, way out of the ordinary. But some advice to my daughter: meet somebody nice, go through the whole courting thing, and then decide whether or not you want to spend your rest of your life with somebody, rather than putting all that on a TV show. But anyway, this is a solo show, and I'm doing something just as much as I'm recording this. This video is actually going to be posted for our Patreon subscribers. We'll get this up about 2 or 3 days earlier, so thank you for all my Patreon subscribers. If you are not a Patreon subscriber and have been a fan of the show for the umpteenth amount of shows we actually have on the interwebs, even though this is episode 92, we have about 160 shows. We started back in January 2015. We're on YouTube at the Dependent Independent podcast page. But if you are a stout supporter of the show and you want to help out a little bit, you can go and donate as little as $1 a month, and you can have access to these early releases, but especially these videos, which are exclusive for my Patreon subscribers. I have no idea when I'm going to decide to put it out to the public, but for those of you that are supporting me on my Patreon page, I do appreciate you. I want to make sure I'm giving you something a little bit different, because every month you give me a something. You give me a something a little bit different than everything else, than everybody else. So I really appreciate the support. But this is going to be a weird show because I don't really have a topic per se. I'd shot out to the Facebook community probably about 2 months ago that, when I'm on the show, I mentioned before that I share experiences and stories that have happened in my life, but also my co-hosts get on and share things revolving around a topic that's happened in their lives. But I've never done really Q&A shows, and I did it once where I had two close supporters of the show and past co-hosts of the show, Dana Buckler and Jesse Lauren, actually came on the show and asked me a bunch of questions, which I thought was a lot of fun. But I just randomly threw it out on Facebook and had people ask me questions. I said, ask me anything you want, doesn't matter what it is. I'll share anything. It just give me an opportunity to pseudo take a break, but also connect with my followers on Facebook and my listeners of the show. So I was able, out of, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, out of a dozen questions, I picked 6 of them. Now, one of the things I wanted to do for the folks that did submit their questions is acknowledge who they are. So I will read some questions out of these 6. They're weird. They're all over the place. I took some notes. I want to make sure that I wanted to get my thoughts out in my head first before winging it, because they took the time to come up with some decent questions, and I want to do my best to answer them. Now, I'm going to make a disclaimer that I'm not an expert in anything. I'm good at a lot of things, but not an expert in anything. And I'm going to say what I feel about these things. You might have your own opinion. That's fine. You might go on the interwebs and get different information, but I did zero research for this. A little bit of research. And I just want to make sure I am as honest as possible with you guys because I expect you guys are as honest with me. So let's do the first question I got from Michelle Reisman, a friend and actually a listener of the show. And her question was, is the purple dye in pools when you pee real? So I did some digging because I'm not a pool owner. I don't think I've ever had the issue of peeing in a pool where, that idea that if I pee in a pool, the water around me is going to turn purple or green or whatever. This one I actually did research on, and I found out it actually is a wives' tale. There is no chemical you can put in your pool that will find urine and turn your pee into purple or green dye around you. Now, I did some research and found out that you can actually put chemicals in there that can detect urine, but it also can detect other things. So the shame of it is you can put that in your pool, but it might give you false positives. That means you might have an area of the pool that changes color, and not so much where, a kid's deciding to pee. I remember when I was a kid, I think not a kid actually, probably in high school. I think that's probably when this whole myth came about where, by the way, don't pee in a pool. Just the idea that the water was in my mouth. And I realized as a young adult, like, why would I want to pee in a pool where the water's in my mouth? So I made a commitment to always get out of the pool. I didn't want to be that guy doing that. And I'm sure people still pee in the pool and think that you put a bunch of chlorine in it and it actually kills all the urine. But there was products online. I did do some searching on Amazon, and there are products that actually find urine in your pool water and actually clean it or attack it or something. Doesn't dye it or anything, but if you have children that are prone to peeing in your pool and you want to make sure you get none in your mouth, you may want to go on Amazon and find the stuff that actually puts in your pool and completely annihilates the urine. So don't pee in your pool. But if you do, always remember that you're not going to have to worry about being called out unless you tell somebody. Maybe they're actually standing next to you and the water gets a little bit warm, that you're going to have this big circle of purple or green dye around you. So Michelle Reisman, thanks for the question. She actually asked another one too. Are kids' sports worth sacrificing every weekend of your life? Now, this is a good one too, because my kids are really active. My kids are 12 and 10, and they both are involved in activities. So my daughter, being a competitive dancer, goes to dance class, does field hockey. My son plays basketball, baseball, and soccer, and he's good at all of them, which is great. My kids excel in those things. But I guess my answer to this was it really depends on how valuable your weekends are. Because I didn't have kids thinking that I would give up weekends so they can have fun. But I ended up doing that anyway. Like now, even though there's downtime now in the summer, once the fall kicks in, we have to arrange our schedules around or trips around what activities the kids are doing. And because they excel, my kids play or dance or play sports in more competitive arenas, which require you to maybe do some traveling or dedicate a lot more time so the kids can contribute to the team. I mean, if it's a good team and your kids are good, you want to make sure that they're there practicing and supporting the team. When I was a kid, I used to look at it like, I don't know. I don't know if I think my wife was more of the high school athlete than me. I wasn't an athlete until I hit college and was a competitive volleyball and a lacrosse player. So the way I kind of look at it is no matter what, they're going to have their entire lives to do something great. But it is funny how parents try really hard to make sure that while they're young, we put them through all these like really extreme schedules, and we bend over backwards I know parents that have like 3 kids and they're driving to 2 different states on a weekend to get them to play sports. I know some kids that play 3 sports in a day, 3 different types of sports in a day. And I don't hang around with a lot of parents that neg out about it or bitch about it and hate the fact that they're giving up their entire weekends to it. I don't really hear that. They look tired sometimes. But technically, like I said about it, really depends on what you want your weekends to look like. We're the grown-ups. Like, we're allowed as parents to actually say, nah, we're not. But then that's risky too, because do you want to be the parent that decided, well, my kids had the potential of doing X, Y, and Z, but I only had them do X because I wanted my weekends back? So it's a real fine line if what you're going to do. I guess it's only temporary because eventually they're either going to get bored with some of the sports or try to focus on one sport. If they're like my son might want to focus on soccer rather than basketball and baseball. But I think he excels in all of them, which is so much fun. And then there's the idea that you don't want your kids to actually just do one sport. They should be doing different sports. None of those problems when I was their age. None of that. I didn't have that problem. I rode my bike to Cap League and went to practice. And my father took me to basketball for a little while and karate. But that was with school. That wasn't really like my father took me to a place and like signed me up. But Michelle, if you feel your weekends are more valuable, then you can easily say no to your kids and say, I think mommy and daddy want more time to spend at home, and we don't want to drive around all over the state to get you to play a game. That's weird. I'm curious. If you're listening to the show, or when you're listening to this show, find me on Twitter or Instagram at dependent_Nick, or direct message me on the Facebook page, and you tell me what you think. Do you feel that's an interesting one? I'm curious if other parents that are listening are willing to chime in on. Do you feel that your kids' sports are worth sacrificing every weekend of your life for? And now again, Michelle, in knowing that her kids are very involved in sports, they are packed. Those weekends are packed. And I can empathize, but we seem to get real lucky with my daughter and my son because we do a lot of things that are local. All our dance competitions, my daughter, are local. All my son's games are fairly local. Maybe as far as we can drive or have to drive is maybe like 45 minutes to an hour. All right, cool. This question's great. And I like the fact when I put this out there on the Facebook page that this listener was really engaged in the conversation. This comes from September Corgliano. And she asks me, what do you think you know about living a happy and successful life that you didn't know when you were 20? And I think right now, well, actually, first I broke it down because I tried to understand what success was. So the question might imply that I didn't know what success was when I was 20. And I don't know if I was successful when I was 20, but when I think of success, I think you could be successful in anything. Like success is truly in the mind of the person actually doing the work. In the type of work that I do, I always ask leaders and managers and employees, what does success look like? Because I really enjoy helping them find their success. I don't think success is all about money. I don't think success is all about power. We work in an environment actually in capitalism, and we live in a country that sometimes opulence and excess and money is considered successful when you've made it, when you made a lot of money. But I think a lot of it is in the eyes of the individual actually seeking the goal. I'm very goal oriented, and I wouldn't consider, success can be something you can consider it as like weight loss. You can look at it as maybe adding an addition to your house on your own. I know some people that have done that. You can look at it as maybe doing a really long bike ride, a tough mudder. Success is really about what fulfills you. And it could be something really small. It could be, something you did for a whole week. Hey, I'm going to give up coffee for a week. That could be successful. I think we lose sight of celebrating our successes. And if what I didn't know in my 20s is that I succeeded in a lot of things and did really well in a lot of things, but I never stopped to smell the roses. I'm learning how to do it better now, but I never stopped to say, you know what, I really did a good job in that. If you've listened to the show and you've heard my story, me growing up, I was constantly trying to find the approval of my father. And not until I went to college did I realize that I kind of started doing things for myself. And I think I would probably, if I was to go back, I'd probably tell my 20-something self that, hey, man, you did a really good job. And I think you should stop and enjoy the fact that you did a really good job on that. And I think then you get a taste for it. And then you keep moving along. I think my problem in my 20s is I never thought I was good enough. So I was constantly chasing the rabbit, and never bothered celebrating any of my successes. And now between the show and my career and my family and my unbelievable kids, I think I'm one of the most successful guys in the world. And it's awesome because I can always find some reason or some way to be successful. So I live a happy and successful life. I still chase the rabbit September. I still try to find ways to be fulfilled, but I know as long as I have a goal in mind, no matter how small or big it is, I'm going to feel successful and I'm going to enjoy it. And I'm going to share that enjoyment with my family and my friends and the people I work with, because back in my 20s, I didn't really understand what that meant. And it's a shame, because life would have been very, very different if I took some time and stopped and looked at myself and did some self-reflection. My 30s would have been a lot different too. I would have been a little bit less stressed and a little bit more content. Although the flip side is, if I was too content, I might have been complacent and lazy and maybe not as successful. But I really don't think that's the case. Another question that September threw at me. This is question number 4. Is that right? Yeah. No, question number 3. What were some key turning points in your life? Now, this personal journey of 200 episodes has been nothing but telling stories about turning points throughout the series of these podcasts. So it forced me to actually go back before I told some of the stories on this show. And if I was to say turning points, and when I say turning points, at least I digested this from September as these are more pivots. It's not that the path stayed the same, but I just kind of veered off a little bit. It was more transitional than anything. So probably the first big pivot of my life changing was when my mother passed away when I was 6 in 1982, January 4th, 1982. That was probably a time that rocked my family. It changed how my father was, my grandmother, my grandfather, my aunt, who's my mother's sister, and my sister and I. And I still to this day, I don't quite know how my wife or my sister processes that loss. I never really talked to her about it. I probably should. But that was probably one of the pivots that started my life in the direction that it was headed. Then another pivot was when we moved back in with my father. That was ironically 2 days ago. That was 33 years ago. And then I met my best friend, Tony, who I lit up Facebook on. That guy's unbelievable. I'm going to get on the show very, very soon, who I met at the apartment pool. And that changed my life too. I have a lifelong friend. He's one of the coolest guys I know. He's great. He knows me better than anybody. All the stories that I've shared with you over these last ridiculous amount of shows, actually, he knows. He was there with me. I'd love to hear it. I'd love to start a podcast from the beginning and have him retell all the stories that I've told of when I was a kid and growing up. But that was a pivot, because we went from an environment living with my grandmother, which was a really church-going environment. I mean, just stop and think about it. Like, not only did my grandmother pass away, but my grandfather died 4 months later. And then my grandmother, being 65 years old, had to take care of twins, 6-year-old twins. That's insane. Find any 6-year-old out there that's willing to do that. That's absolutely insane. So my grandmother decided that it was probably the right time for us to move back in with my father, and my sister and I did. Those were tumultuous years living with my dad, but another pivot was having my first job when I was 14, earning money on my own. We were forced at a young age when we were 9, my sister and I, to be very independent, hence the show. The idea that my father was out and my sister and I had to cook for ourselves, clean for ourselves, do our own laundry at 9 years old. I mean, I could barely get my kids to fold their laundry at 9, let alone actually doing the whole thing or walking to a laundromat and actually doing their own laundry, taking detergent and whatnot. So that was a big step, a big pivot, but we seem to handle it well. And then going through those years, probably the next pivot was college. High school was pretty weird. I didn't really like high school very much, but college was a time when I started doing things for myself. I mentioned before, I think, in an earlier question about kind of doing things for my father's approval, when technically when I got to school, I was the only one there to worry about what I was doing. So I really started, I was an athlete. I learned about leadership in college. I was a great artist in school. That was really, really fun. I met my wife. Again, that's another pivot, another turning point of, I dated women in school, but never I really wanted to meet. I really was, it's so cliche, but I wanted to meet somebody I could marry. I didn't want to be that sleeping around type of guy. It really wasn't my MO, and I wasn't that cool either. But my wife might disagree with that. But we started dating, and it was really the only woman I could be around that I could be myself with, and I didn't feel like I was being judged. So that was a pivot. Later on, getting my first job out of college, which I've talked about on the show. It's a huge series. You guys should go check it out. It's Life of a Salesman, or I think that's the title. And knocking on doors, my first time like with a college degree, and learning how ridiculous a multi-level marketing company could be and not know about it. But when I hit rock bottom with that, the next pivot was actually a turning point, was living with my in-laws. I had no money. Everything I owned was in my car, and I drove from Chicago all the way to live with my in-laws. And to be honest, the rest is history. The rest is podcast history. All the stories that have happened since then. My wife and I has been on the show, and we've talked about those stories, and we've shared those things, and my in-laws have listened to them and have been moved by them. And September, if you want to go and get caught up on the next stage of it, go ahead. I think we always look at lives as turning points. I don't think I ever turned. I might have veered a little bit, but I think turning points are when you completely do a 180. I think I was always on this path. I was always on the path to get to right here, right now. And I think I wouldn't consider any of those things that happen, those events, turning points. I would probably look at someone who maybe had beaten addiction or had done something, just their lives don't even represent what they were before, but there are bits of my past lives in what I do now. You can't leave it all behind, and those are more pivots than turning points. But those last two questions, I want to thank September for asking me those. Those were awesome. And September, I'm anxious for you to be at the meetup. Oh, if I can take a break for a second, we're actually going to be, and when I say we, I really mean we. I'm thinking, episode 100 is right around the corner. My birthday's in December. Episode 50, we filled up a local brewery, Tomfoolery Brewing Company. I think I'm drinking out of a glass for those watching on video right there. Tomfoolery finally got the courage to get a pint glass from them. And we did our 50th episode there, 2 years to the day. And ironically, it's going to be almost 4 years in January of next year that I've been podcasting. And I've been thinking about doing a live meetup. Not so much a podcast, but just a live meetup for the community that's been listening to the show in the South Jersey, Philly area to all meet up at Barcade in Philly. I don't really have the address right now, but I will start promoting that as we get closer on social media. So as you follow the show and follow the Dependent Independent Podcast Facebook page, I suggest you do. If you're not on there before, 'cause it's amazing the amount of relationships that have come up from just being in the community, how many people continue to talk to each other that I'm not even a part of. I've always enjoyed that as part of having conversations with people. But more to come on that, and that's going to be a lot of fun. But I know September and I bounce back and forth how cool that would be, Sans Kids for an adult meetup, and what more fun to have at a barcade where they have, I think, like 30, I'm probably exaggerating, but like 30 upright arcade cabinets. You can get craft beers, and how much fun that would be just to play arcade games the whole time. All right, we have 3 more questions, not as heavy as those last two. And I think this one also comes from September. She says, at what age does it become harder to make friends? Kids make them so easily, and as adults, it takes our kids to make new friends for us to make new friends. Without my kids, I wouldn't know half the people I know and love now. Now, this is kind of a two-parter, because you're right. When we were kids, it was easy to make friends. And I think that has a lot to do with how we judge people. I think as kids, we don't go into relationships with any apprehensions. We just see a kid. I mean, I mentioned I met my best friend 33 years ago. I was at the apartment pool the second day I lived with my dad. The lifeguard there, her name was Jane. She saw my friend Tony and said, hey, do you kids want to hang out? And we were just like, yeah, be my friend. And it was that easy. There was no apprehension or judgment that came with making friends. But as you get older, you become more of a cynic, and you get wronged by people, and you put up more of a defense against it. Now I can tell you that's why I even started the show back before I hit the microphone for the first time, that I was in my late 30s and thought I could make friends. I just decided, no, I can't make friends. And that's on me. I think a lot of it has to do with the amount of work you put into it. Not only of course, it's easier for kids to do it based on what I just said, but if you're going to build relationships with people, it's easy when you're standing on the sideline of a soccer field and you have something in common. That's the thing too, having something in common. I've learned that as I've done this, I engage a lot of people in Facebook groups, and I recently joined the Rotary Club in my town, where now we have a group of people, all different walks of life, but yet all have the common interest to help the community, which is awesome. I mean, that's so cool. But having something in common with someone or similar interests makes it easy to make friends, because I guess, is the reality that you always have something to talk about? I mean, is it really a lot of fun to be around a friend that you don't really have anything to talk about? Is I guess communicating with can you find someone you can communicate with and make the effort? That will help you make friends without having to lean on your kids. But it's kind of weird, right? Like you go, I think the real pivot, the real change, September, happens when you go from being a couple to having kids. I think that's the biggest change, because I remember when you're single, right? You hang out with single people, you party, you hang out, more single people come over. It's such a good time. And then suddenly people start getting married, and married couples usually hang out with married couples. And then suddenly that dynamic changes, where you're not really hanging out with a lot of single people. You're hanging out with married people, because married people might have different problems. People are buying houses when they're married. People are moving when they're married, and all that. And whatever stereotypes you have of people actually being married. And then you have people that are married, then have kids. Because I remember being at my brother-in-law's house, which is a hub of social life at his house, my brother and sister-in-law. And I remember not having kids and being in the kitchen with all the other married non-kid couples, looking at hearing all the kids cry in there, going, geez, wow, that they got to have it so hard. How do they deal with all that? And then not till I had my first child and was in the kitchen and watched how they looked at all the parents with kids and were basically, oh God, I can't believe, I'm glad I don't have to deal with the crying baby, but realized that one of those babies that were crying was mine. And that was, again, a pivot where you then become selective on who you hang out with, because it's weird to be around people that don't have anything in common with you. You find a comfort in being around people that are dealing with the same struggles and frustrations that you are. I hate to say that misery breeds company, but that's pretty much what it is. And it's funny, you go from, as an adult, misery breeds company, right, to then as a kid where it's full optimism and there's no cynicism and nothing but happiness, and you're just like, hey, let's play. So I don't think there's a way around that. You'd have to work extremely hard, and it'd be awkward, because you'd go out to bars as a grown adult in your late 30s, early 40s, and just try to socialize and say hi. I mean, I'm sure everyone's, again, as adults, are hesitant because they're thinking if a guy walks up to a woman just to say hello and ask her how her day was, there's an MO behind it, or vice versa. And it's too many stigmas. There's way too many stigmas. I guess it's a safe zone to make friends when your kids are in the sports or activities. I guess without it, I don't know what we would do. I mean, go to like churches and singles bars, not singles bars, but like couples retreats and things like that. I guess it just makes it easier. So to answer your question, what age does it become harder to make friends? I think the moment you decide to have kids. I mean, not that to make friends on the way that you did prior to having kids, then it completely changes. And it's great though too, actually. That lifestyle really doesn't, for those of you that are listening that are thinking about having kids, it doesn't completely, and I heard Will Smith say this on Oprah, weird, and I remember this, but he said, all it does is change things. Having kids and starting a family, it doesn't destroy things or end things. It just changes things. Like I said before about pivots, it doesn't make anything, it doesn't completely turn things around where you're not who you are anymore. All it does is hold on to some semblance of what's important, but takes you on a different path. So I want to thank September. Those are great questions, September. I'm really, really glad you asked those questions. Now, these are two ones that are kind of off the beaten path. And this first one right here, or the second to last one, the penultimate one, is a question that was asked by Sean Moran. Sean Moran was actually a fraternity brother of mine that actually runs his own YouTube channel, and he's trying to get deep into YouTube and monetization. And I'm going to put a link, Sean, I'm going to put a link to your channel in the show notes so you guys, listeners, can check it out. But one of the questions he asked, and again, these are one of those things I'm not an expert on, like I said before, how do you monetize your work, such as podcasts, YouTubes, etc.? And I've been doing this for as long as I have, and have engaged a lot of people that are big into social media. I'm actually helping the Rotary Club with their social media, which is great too, because you learn a little bit about how you market your podcast. But as far as podcasts and YouTube making money, first and foremost, you have to add some value that your audience or consumers will feel there's a monetary amount for. Now, that can be anything from you're providing teachings, lessons. But it's weird, though. I don't think a podcast really makes money. I don't make money from this podcast. Unless you're a Patreon subscriber, but you're really supporting just this whole mission here. And then you get early access to all this stuff, which is pretty cool. Unless you have an enormous amount of followers, like these famous people, I look at it, these people decide to start their own podcast. They already start with an audience. You know, if I don't know, Brad Pitt started a podcast, people would tune in just because they've seen his movies. He wouldn't have to worry about building an audience. So having a giant audience where it's beneficial to advertisers that they want to hop on your bandwagon, whether you're, and that leads to whether it be subscribers to your podcast and downloads, or whether it be your YouTube followers, because there's a whole algorithm on how many YouTube followers you get and how much money you can make. But I think the advice I would give anyone who wants to make money doing this, I'm actually going to be at a podcast conference in September, the Mid-Atlantic Podcast Conference that I'm speaking at, and this is my third year there. But one of the things that blew me away is there's people there making six-figure salaries by doing podcasts. But there's a lot more to it than that. It's not just speaking on a microphone and putting it out there. It's, are you using it to promote a business and you're an entrepreneur that you're generating revenue from that? Or are you connected to a network of podcasts that generate revenue that you're getting a piece of? Is podcasts or podcasting or YouTube videos a piece of maybe books you publish or workshops you do, or anything that you do, again, to add value? So you have to add some type of value to your customers or your potential customers or your subscribers or whatever it is, that they're willing to open up their wallet and give you something. I always kind of attribute it to like it's kind of passive, right? It's you know, having a Patreon page, and my Patreon subscribers actually passively give me a couple dollars a month, and I give them something in return, but it makes me appreciate them a lot more. But it's kind of like when you go to like, at least where we live, there's a lot of roadside grocers that have fresh produce, and they'll put a basket down, and they'll have the baskets out with squash and strawberries and blueberries, and it'll just say, you know, pay what you think the value is. And I always think that's awesome. Like, that's really great. I think when people do that, they're willing to pay more. Like, there's less pressure, but they get to choose what they want to pay. And I think if you're going to monetize your stuff, giving them the option to be able to do that is awesome. I know that Patreon's out there, but there's other podcasts, services or content creator services that you can actually do that. I'm not quite sure and familiar with all of them, but I'm sure someone's out there trying to knock Patreon off its block to take their revenue stream, which I think is awesome. It's always cool. With technology, people are always coming up with different and better ways to do things. So create content that people want to absorb and that are willing, you're adding enough value that they want to pay for, but attach it to something. I don't think you can generate revenue just by putting out content. That's, if you really want to generate revenue, figure out a way to add something more and using either YouTube or podcasting to actually accentuate it. It's kind of a way of you marketing your services. I know there's people out there that do like free coaching and free teaching, and that's always interesting too. I mean, I get paid to coach at work, but there are people out there that give free coaching that may lead to like a book that they have or something, which I think is pretty cool. Again, no expert at all. I make nothing from this other than a couple bucks through Patreon, and hopefully if you guys are supporting the show, you guys want to go on there and support me even more, and that's great, and that's a feel-good stuff, but it just gives me more reason to give you some exclusive content. The last question I got is from a podcaster and the creator of the Podcast Discovery Center on Facebook, and this gentleman's name is Sean Hayes. Now, Sean Hayes is a working guy. And they're my kids still up having fun. The last question I have is, and Sean asked me this, or Anthony asked me this, is why do managers and leaders, etc., lack moral and ethical code? Now, I put this one last because this is more of the it's less podcast, more my professional side of answering this. And usually when someone asks that, they've been exposed to something like that. In the world now where we live in, that people in politics and people of power, now we're starting to question their integrity, their moral compass. And I think it's really, people are really quick. When being a leader is not an easy thing. Being a leader, you have to make unpopular decisions and choices. And I don't think anyone who seriously embraces leadership understands that they're going to have to, well, there must be a fight going on in the other room, that they're going to have to make sacrifices in order to be a full-blown leader and serve others. You unfortunately can't make decisions that benefit the total. And I get that. I absolutely get that. Now, mind you, you can't make decisions that are off the wall that only benefit a minority because you're dependent on those things. But hey, guys, see what happens is they get too antsy when they get up here. So when you're a leader of a family, you're not always going to make. I think they know that I'm recording too. I think I told them that go ahead, just don't even worry about it. I think when you have to lead a family, or you have to parent, and that they're leaders, or when you're leading a business, that you really have to do a good job at understanding and accepting the fact that you're not going to be liked all the time. And you may make decisions that seem, and that's the borderline of, and now I guess, what am I talking about? I'm trying to make excuses for people that make unethical decisions, leaders. I don't believe there are leaders out there that are son of a bitches. Like they are out to destroy people and the power gets to their head, but there are not a lot of those people. I'm a optimist, and I think a lot of leaders out there that do make those poor decisions that seem unethical or not morally sound are just dumb. Like they're full-blown Peter principle. They shouldn't be in their positions. And I don't think that it's safe to throw at them that they're unethical. I've never worked with a leader that made unethical decisions. I've worked with leaders that have made dumb decisions, that not knowledgeable decisions, or they're just have bad skill set. But I don't know if I don't know why they lack moral and ethical code. I think that most leaders that end up pushing the boundary, like the guys that ran Enron, that were knowledgeable of what they were doing was wrong. I think karma's a bitch. Eventually things catch up to you. And I think any leader that is in any position that does things that are completely off the reservation when it comes to what leadership is will pay the penalty someday. There will be in a situation where they will be humbled and they'll decide whether or not they change their ways or completely fall apart. And I think that's really on them. So to answer your question, Anthony, I don't know why they do that. Because they're dumb, like they're truly dumb, or they have zero grasp of the responsibility of being a leader, that they make just the dumbest decisions ever and leave a wake behind them. And I see them in business. I see them at places I've worked. It's sad. It's not something that any leader, when you jump into leadership or you're thrusted through a leadership position, wants to experience. But unfortunately, if leadership's not an easy thing, but good leaders and great leaders are not easy to come by either, because you really have to shine and make conscious choices and make the impact and be conscious of the impact you want to make. So that's my answer to that. Now, I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining me on episode 92 of this quick Q&A. I'm going to be taking a few weeks off from the show, maybe post some past episodes in the coming weeks. I usually kind of take a break around August to then prepare for September. There's a lot of noise happening. Again, I'm back in our old studio in the office, which again butts between kind of the hamburger between two buns it's my bedroom and then the kids' bedroom. But as it gets louder, the kids will get rowdier. And as much as we tell them to be quiet, they'll keep making, and they'll get louder. I just don't understand how that works. So I'm going to sign off. I want to thank everyone for listening. If you haven't subscribed to the show, make sure you go to the podcast, whatever app you're listening to, and hit the subscribe button. So when these shows post every Thursday at 9 a.m., you get them right away so you can listen. If you're I know you want to support the show, and I thank you because I know there's a lot of you out there that have been tuning in each and every week that I've done this through, no matter what happens between trying to make the time to do this, especially when the kids are crazy in the other room watching The Bachelorette, and I'm really curious about how that if she actually proposed to the guy. It's going to be interesting, but that'll be on for another hour. You go on Patreon and become a Patreon subscriber. Again, as little as $1 a month, you can get access to these early access episodes. I'll edit this video, and this will be up very, very soon. I'll get this up tonight, and eventually it'll pop on YouTube. But again, I want to give my Patreon subscribers something a little bit different. But the audio of this podcast will hit the podcast feed at 9 a.m. on Thursday. Thank you. Enjoy your summer. Thanks for tuning in. And Patreon subscribers, thanks for your support. I'm Nick G, the host of the Dependent Independent podcast, and I am out.